All right, I want to talk about content security policies. Now, this is a meta tag that you can put inside the head of any web page. And while my primary focus is how it's used within a Cordova mobile app, a hybrid application, you can use it on any website whatsoever. The purpose of this meta tag is to tell the browser where it's allowed to go to download different things. So it's to help avoid issues like cross-site scripting, XSS. With cross-site scripting, what happens is people are trying to inject resources, or they're trying to get into your website, trying to hack your website using their own resources, using scripts or images, trying to change what's on your website by forcing your website to download and include things from their own web server. So we want to avoid doing things like that. We want to protect our website and protect our users. So we include a content security policy meta tag inside the head. This gives very clear, unambiguous instructions to the website about where resources are allowed to come from. So in my sample page here, I have a meta tag right here up inside the head. And HTTP equiv is the attribute, and that is set to content security policy. Then there's a content attribute, and this is where you define the different places that the browser is allowed to go to get different things. At its very, very minimum, you could do something like this. I'm saying that the default source is anything. With that tag, it's the same as not having a content security policy meta tag. It's just wide open. Download anything from anywhere. Get your images, your fonts, your media files, your streaming resources, your data URIs. All of that stuff can come from anywhere. But we don't want to do that. We want to be a little bit more specific about what we are allowing within our website. So there's different categories: default source, style source, script source, media source, font source, connect source, image source, and there's a few others as well, things that have been added in the second version of CSP. Base URI and form action are a couple of those. Base URI, you define where content is allowed to come from within your site. So you can say, all right, things that are being loaded from my domain are allowed to come from this folder or these folders. Form action, where's the browser allowed to submit data from a form? Where is your JavaScript allowed to send data from a form? So that would be the form action. These are added in the version 2, as I was saying. These are kind of the common ones that you'll see. These are all part of version 1 of CSP. Now, these different values that we can put inside of here, there is a list of possible values that we can put inside after every one of these. So the way it works is you put the category and then a space-separated list of all of the things that are allowed, and then a semicolon, followed by the next one. Now, you don't have to put them on separate lines. I've done that simply to make this a little bit more readable. The style source is where you're going to get your CSS files from. Script source, where JavaScript files are allowed to come from. Media source, so where your media files, your movies, your audio, things like that. Font source, where you're getting your fonts. Connect source, if you're doing fetch calls, if you're making AJAX requests with XHTTP request or with fetch, where those things are allowed to come from. So you can specify and kind of protect yourself to say that I'm only going to accept data if it comes from one of these three sources, my own domain or these two other places. These are the APIs that I'm dealing with, so I'm going to protect myself and say to my web page or my app that this is the only place that it is allowed to fetch data. Image source, where you're getting your images from. So the meaning for these, self means it's coming from the same domain. Wherever my HTML file came from, that's where the other resources came from, or need to come from. Now this default source, this is the fallback. So if there's not something specifically defined here, if I don't have any of these, if all I have is a default source, when it's checking an image or it's checking a font or a script or a style, if it doesn't have those categories, it falls back to the default and checks, all right, What did you define in the default? Self, our own domain. Data is data URIs, so if you've got a base 64 image, GAP is something used by PhoneGap and Cordova. If you are running a Cordova app on iOS, this is a protocol that it uses internally to talk with its plugins. Unsafe eval means if you're going to be using the eval command in your code. Don't recommend that you have this one in there all the time. You will get it by default with Cordova, just in case there's a eval being used in a plugin, but I would try without this to see if it works, see if your website works without this, because this does leave you open. It's kind of a security risk. WS is WebSockets. Unsafe inline. Down here, if I was to go inside my paragraph tag and add a style attribute, or add an on-click handler like this, these are the unsafe inline. So I'm saying that, okay, I'm allowed to do that. Again, not something you're typically going to do, so if you leave it out, good. You're making yourself better protected. Script source, if you are going to be getting your scripts from someplace other than just self, so if you're bringing in libraries and other resources, you can do that. List the remote domains here. When you put in the domains, you can do things like this. You can say, as long as it comes from a site that has HTTPS, I'm happy. Or you could say that anywhere from example.com. So here I'm saying any subdomain on example.com. So it could be example.com, or it could be www.example.com, or abc.example.com, whatever it is that you want. So you can create your own custom lists to say, this is where my scripts are coming from, this is where my styles are coming from. So I'm using a content delivery network for my CSS or my JavaScript. Maybe you're including jQuery or something like that, and you want to use the CDN version of that. And same thing applies down here. Yeah, you can use any combination you want of any of these different properties. You can put an asterisk, which means absolutely anything. A few that I didn't have up above: file system, blob, media stream. File system, this one you might run into if you're building a Cordova or PhoneGap app and you wanted to access things that were on the device's file system. Blob, if you're dealing with binary large objects, which are binary files, images, or other things, PDF files. You want to be able to work with those. If you're streaming media, the source to say that you want to be able to use that. Content is something that's used by Cordova internally. And none. If you wanted to prevent absolutely everything and anything and say, okay, no, I don't want to have any CSS on my site. I can't see ever doing that, but if you wanted to say that, you could put none inside quotation marks, just like you do self, and we can come in here and say that, hey, you know what, there's not going to be any scripts allowed on my site. If I did that, script source none, it would not allow, it would not run if I was trying to bring in those JavaScript files. The JavaScript files would not be allowed to be downloaded and run. All right, so that's the content security policy. I will put a copy of this file as a code gist, just so you have a reference with all of these categories and values so you can look back on them later. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.